The spark of revolution. On July 13, 1789, the day before the storming of the Bastille, an angry mob attacked the Saint-Lazare monastery in Paris. They weren't looking for gold, weapons, or political prisoners. They were there to loot the monastery's barns, dragging grain to the central markets, while a single, desperate cry echoed through the halls. Allons chercher du pain. Let us go and look for bread. For the French peasantry of the 18th century, the price of food, particularly bread, was a far greater concern than abstract political ideals. The cost of bread had skyrocketed so high that it could consume anywhere from 50 to an astonishing 97% of a worker's daily wage. The Enlightenment may have provided the philosophical ideals of liberty and equality, but it was the empty, starving stomachs of the common people that truly provided the spark for the French Revolution. The Ancien Régime, the old royal establishment, relied entirely on the rural agricultural class to feed Paris, where livestock and grain were considered the predominant forms of wealth. Yet the relationship was deeply parasitic. Famines were so extreme that from one end of the kingdom to the other, a national cry rose up against the lack of food. The food that did reach the peasant class was often rotten or second-rate, while the nobility lived in affluence, completely disconnected from the misery of the masses. Starving commoners would even sneak into fields at night to cut down grain out of sheer desperation. This stark environmental and economic injustice reminds us of a universal truth. Bread is the foundation of human civilization, and the lack of it can topple empires. But the story of bread begins long before the bloody streets of Paris. It starts long before empires, long before recorded history, and surprisingly, thousands of years before the invention of farming itself.
For decades, archaeologists and scientists believed in a strict timeline of human progress. First, humans invented agriculture and settled down, and then they invented bread. But deep in the Black Desert of Jordan, at an archaeological site called Shubayqa 1, researchers uncovered something that rewrote history. In the remnants of an ancient fireplace, they found charred crumbs of flatbread dating back 14,400 years. This was during the Natufian period, at least 4,000 years before the emergence of agriculture. These ancient hunter-gatherers were meticulously harvesting wild wheat, wild barley, and the tubers of a plant known as clubrush. As archaeobotanist Amaya Aranz-Otegi discovered when she tried to recreate this ancient recipe, gathering the tubers was easy, but processing them into flour was incredibly time-consuming and difficult. The resulting flatbread had a gritty texture, tasting salty with a slightly sweet finish. This discovery fundamentally shifted our understanding of early humans. Bread was not simply a byproduct of farming. It is entirely possible that the desire to make bread is what drove humans to settle down and domesticate wheat in the first place. And the roots of processing grain go back even further. In Australia, grinding stones used for seed processing have been unearthed and dated to 60,000 years ago, representing the earliest evidence of such technology in the world. Our relationship with bread and starchy foods is so profound that it literally altered human genetics. Around 12,000 years ago, as the agricultural lifestyle spread across Europe and the Middle East, human diets shifted dramatically to rely on highly starchy staples like wheat and other grains. To extract energy from this new diet, our bodies had to adapt. Enter the AMY1 gene. This gene produces salivary amylase, the enzyme in your saliva that breaks down starch into sugar the moment you put carbohydrates in your mouth. If you chew a piece of bread or pasta long enough, it begins to taste sweet. That is your salivary amylase at work. While our Neanderthal and chimpanzee cousins only had a single copy of this gene, modern human genomes rapidly evolved to harbor anywhere from 1 to 11 copies. According to researchers at UC Berkeley, the incidence of chromosomes with multiple copies of amylase genes increased 7-fold over the last 12,000 years. This evolutionary leap provided a massive survival advantage for our agrarian ancestors, allowing them to efficiently extract calories from bread and grains. In fact, the rate of evolution leading to these extra amylase genes was 10,000 times faster than the normal rate of single DNA base pair changes. We did not just invent bread, we biologically evolved to eat it.
The bakeries of the Pharaohs. While hunter-gatherers invented the concept of bread, it was the ancient Egyptians who scaled it into an industry and deeply embedded it into culture. Over 5,000 years ago, utilizing the highly fertile soils of the Nile Valley, the Egyptians cultivated emmer wheat and barley. They transformed bread making from a simple domestic chore into a highly organized, massive production system. The Egyptians mastered leavened bread. They used natural wild yeasts, often utilizing a piece of dough saved from the previous day, an early sourdough starter, or even the foam skimmed from beer fermentation to make their dough rise. This dough was then shaped and baked in intricate clay ovens constructed from Nile mud. In Egypt, bread was the absolute cornerstone of the economy. It was used as a fundamental commodity and a form of payment. Laborers who built the monuments of Egypt were paid their wages in daily rations of bread and beer. The economic and spiritual value of bread was so high that it followed the Egyptians into the afterlife. Tombs were packed with elaborate funerary loaves to sustain the dead, and intricate wooden models of bakeries and breweries were buried alongside the deceased to ensure they would never go hungry in the next world. To the Egyptians, bread was so synonymous with existence that their vernacular word for it, aish, translates directly to life.
Panem et circenses. As civilization expanded, bread became a tool of political control. By the time of the Roman Empire, the state understood that controlling the grain supply meant controlling the people. In the 2nd century BC, Greek bakers migrated to Rome, bringing with them the invention of the freestanding, preheated oven, leading to the establishment of massive commercial bakeries and bakers' guilds. The Roman poet and satirist Juvenal coined a phrase that perfectly captures the political weaponization of food, panem et circenses, or bread and circuses. Juvenal observed that the Roman populace, who once held immense political power in the Republic, had surrendered their rights and responsibilities. To keep the volatile plebeian mob from revolting against political corruption or demanding democracy, the emperors simply provided free grain doles, the bread, and spectacular gladiatorial entertainment at the Colosseum, the Circuses. Juvenal wrote this while observing the execution of Sejanus, a once powerful praetorian prefect under Emperor Tiberius. He noted how quickly the mob turned on their former darling, caring only for their immediate needs. This tactic was used repeatedly in times of tumult. When a devastating fire burned Rome in 64 AD under Emperor Nero, rumors spread that Nero himself had started the blaze to clear land for a new palace. Facing an enraged populace, Nero dropped the price of grain to a mere 3 sesterces and opened his private gardens to shelter the homeless. When that failed to calm the mob, he used the arenas to execute Christians as scapegoats, the ultimate bloody circus to distract from his own political failings. Keep the people fed and distracted, and they will happily look the other way. The Golden Age and the Middle Ages. Following the fall of Rome, bread continued to evolve across the globe. During the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, from the 7th to the 13th centuries, bread making saw massive technological and culinary advancements. The fertile lands of Mesopotamia and Egypt served as massive reservoirs for wheat production, aided by advanced irrigation techniques and high-quality seeds. In cities like Baghdad, public bakeries flourished, and bakers were organized into highly regulated professional guilds. It was also during the Abbasid Caliphate that we see some of the earliest recorded recipes for the sandwich. Long before the Earl of Sandwich gave the dish its English name, 10th and 13th century Arabic cookbooks described sandwiches known as basmaward and awasat. One specific recipe, named after Caliph El-Mamun, featured chicken layered on thin rakak bread, topped with walnuts, citron leaves, mint, and tarragon. Meanwhile, in medieval Europe, bread served a completely different, highly practical purpose. It was the tableware. In a standard medieval table setting, people ate their meals off thick slices of stale, hard bread, known as trenchers. Measuring about 6 by 4 inches, these bread plates soaked up the juices from roasted meats and stews. In times of wealth, these juice-soaked trenchers were given to the poor or fed to dogs after the meal. But during times of famine, they were eaten by the diners themselves. Bread was so critical to survival that by the 13th century, Britain instituted the assize of bread and ale, strict laws regulating the price, weight, and quality of bread to prevent bakers from cheating the public. The Dark Age of Bread. As populations boomed and the Industrial Revolution took hold in the 18th and 19th centuries, bread entered a dark era of adulteration. To maximize profits and make cheap bread look brilliantly white, unscrupulous bakers in England and the United States began mixing hazardous materials into their flour. Daily bread was routinely adulterated with chalk, sawdust, plaster, clay, alum, and even ammonium carbonate. Public health alarms were raised as early as 1820 by chemists like Frederick Accium. In America, health reformer Sylvester published a treatise in 1837 urging people to bake their own bread at home using unrefined wheat flour to avoid these public bakehouse poisons, giving birth to the graham bread and graham crackers we still know today. It took decades of strict government regulations, like the Food Adulteration Acts in Britain, to finally put an end to poisoned bread. The industrial loaf. The 20th century changed the fundamental nature of bread forever, prioritizing speed, scale, and convenience over traditional nutrition.
In 1928, Otto Frederick Rohwedder revolutionized the bakery aisle by inventing a practical machine that automatically sliced and wrapped bread, giving birth to the era of pre-sliced supermarket loaves. But this industrial efficiency came at a nutritional cost. The modern milling processes discarded the bran and wheat germ to extend the flour's shelf life, stripping the bread of dietary fiber, iron, B vitamins, and essential fatty acids. The nutritional deficiency was so severe that at the start of World War II, the U.S. government had to mandate the chemical fortification of white flour with thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, and iron just to keep military recruits healthy. The mechanization of bread peaked in 1961 with the invention of the Chorleywood bread process in the United Kingdom. For millennia, bread required slow fermentation to rise and develop flavor. The Chorleywood process replaced time with intense mechanical mixing and chemical additives. Commercial bakers began using reducing agents like L-cysteine and oxidants like ascorbic acid to drastically cut fermentation times. A batch of dough could now be mixed, risen, and baked in under 3 hours. This birthed the modern quick bread, the soft, ultra-fast supermarket loaf that dominates shelves today, sacrificing complex taste and digestibility for maximum shelf life and profit.
The sourdough revival and conclusion. Today, however, we are witnessing a global rebellion against the industrial loaf. Driven by a desire for better nutrition, complex flavor, and a connection to our past, there is a massive revival of artisanal sourdough. Sourdough isn't just a flavor, it is a complex, living microbial ecosystem. Instead of relying on a single strain of commercial baker's yeast, traditional sourdough ferments using a symbiotic dance between wild yeasts and lactic acid bacteria, such as Lactobacillus sanfranciscensis and Lactobacillus plantarum. In a healthy sourdough starter, these bacteria outnumber yeast by up to 100 to 1. This slow, ancient fermentation process does incredible things to the dough. The bacteria produce organic acids that lower the pH, acting as a natural preservative. They produce exopolysaccharides that naturally improve the bread's texture without artificial hydrocolloids. More importantly, the bacteria pre-digest complex starches and break down gluten proteins, resulting in bread with a lower glycemic index, higher mineral availability, and profound benefits for our colon health and gut microbiome. We are returning to the ancient methods, cultivating the same wild microbial ecosystems that fueled the builders of the pyramids, sparked the French Revolution, and sustained human civilization for over 14,000 years. From the primitive grinding stones of Natufian hunter-gatherers to the highly regulated bakeries of Rome and Baghdad, bread is the silent witness to human history. It is the food that built us, shaped our very genetics, and formed the bedrock of society. If you want to understand how the food on your plate shaped human history, hit subscribe. We dig into stories like this every week. And tell us in the comments, what food should we cover next?